The living world, evolution of biodiversity. This unit describes biodiversity of Earth and how it came to be, and how environmental factors can cause and influence its decline. So biodiversity can be described as at a genetic level, at a species level, and then at an ecosystem level. All right, the living world, biodiversity, how evolution creates biodiversity. The living world, biodiversity, how evolution creates biodiversity, part 2. Evolution can also occur through a random process. Artificial and natural selection are important mechanisms of evolution, but evolution can also occur just at random and be like non-adaptive in its process. And in this case, the genetic composition of a population changes and over time, but these changes are not related to differences in fitness of the individuals. There are 5 random processes that this can happen. We call that a mutation because that can happen at random, gene flow, genetic drift, a bottleneck effect, and the founder effect. If a random mutation is not lethal, it can be added to a genetic variation in a population. So the larger the population is, the more opportunities there will be for these mutations to appear. And as the number of mutations start to accumulate, then the population over time, evolution has occurred. Gene flow is a process by which individuals move from one population to another, and thereby they alter the genetic composition of both populations. Genetic drift is a change in the genetic composition of a population over time as a result of a random mating process. So like mutation and gene flow, genetic drift is a non-adaptive random process. It can have particular important role in altering genetic composition of a population. It typically affects a smaller population. Because in small populations, random mating amongst individuals can eliminate some of the rarest individuals just simply because they just didn't mate that year. And so, for example, let me see if I can give you an example. Imagine you have a very small population, like 5 animals, in which 2 of those individuals carry genes that produce black hair, and 3 of them produce genes that have white hair. Well, if only the guys with black hair mate, then the next generation only has black hair. That is what we call genetic drift. A drastic reduction in the size of a population due to whatever reason is what we call a bottleneck effect. It's another random process that can occur and change a population's whole genetic composition. A population might experience a drastic reduction in its numbers for many reasons, like loss of habitat or some natural disaster. Something could have been harvested by humans. Or just changes in the environment. All of this illustrates a bottleneck effect that can happen. One of the best examples is cheetahs and their spots. All right, so when the size of a population is reduced, the genetic variation that is present in the population is also reduced. So the fewer individuals that have these really unique spots in a population, when the cheetah population went into a bottleneck effect, what was reduced. So now a lot of the cheetahs, they look alike because all of their original population had a lot of variety. There was a bottleneck effect that drastically reduced the cheetah population to a very small number, and now they all look alike. That drastic reduction in their spots was not the only thing that the cheetahs are running into a problem with. It also makes them very genetically alike, which can increase their risk of disease and increase a low fertility rate. And so a bottleneck effect can have a lot of detriment on a population. And oftentimes, it makes the organisms less adaptable to future changes in the environment. And so through this process, some species who have been forced into a bottleneck effect can ultimately lead to extinction. Okay, imagine that a few individuals of a particular bird species happen to be blown off into the wind, and then they're now off their usual migration route, and they land in this very, very likable oceanic island. This illustrates what we call a founder effect. So let's just say that this bird population, two of these individuals have been drawn there at a random process. They've left the mainland and now they're on this island. So the genotypes that they possess are only a subset of the original population. They basically have colonized an island. They become founders. So we give rise to a whole new population that has a genetic composition that's very different from like the original one. And so a change in the genetic composition of a population as a result of descendants from colonizing is what we call the founder effect. So let's just see some examples here. I have an example of evolution by mutation. So a mutation has occurred and can arise in a population just at random. And if it's not lost, it may increase in its frequency that it appears over time, just through a normal mating process. One of the scariest examples in gene flow is the Florida panther. The population of the Florida panther has declined to a very low number, and so the percentages of Florida panthers that had these kinked tails has increased to approximately 90%. That was like its original. But several of these panthers were moved from Texas and brought to Florida, and so after they have interbreeded with the other Floridian panthers, then now there is just a less percentage of all of these panthers that have kinky tails. So now the Florida population has experienced this decline. Evolution by genetic drift. If you look here, we have two populations, a small population and a large population. So there can be change just based on the size of a population. In the small population, which was 40% black and 60% white, once the animals mated, there was a huge increase in the white number to eventually where it was actually lost, like a color was actually lost. Now, if I have a large population, they're more likely to hold on to those less common genotypes and phenotypes. The sheer number of individuals allows for an arise of a similar population. So here's some real data on my cheetah population. So back in the day, a while ago, there was cheetahs with no spots. Some of them had really tiny spots, and then some of them had these like really big blotchy spots. So when they saw this huge decline in their population, it bottlenecked. Only the few individuals that survived were able to reproduce. So now we actually don't have any cheetahs on the planet that don't have any spots. That's a complete trait that's been lost. And now we have a lot of them with these large, big, blotchy spots. And so finding a cheetah with these tiny little spots is actually pretty rare these days. All right, a founder effect is the change in the genetic composition of a population as a result of descendants that have left. And so they have now colonized an island. So just for example, we have an island where these two gray birds and this red bird have come. The original population had very small amounts of gray birds, lots of blue, lots of red. But now the island population looks very different from the original population. They've been separated by their larger population, and so now they show this less variety. And this is just an example of how the founder effect is really a bottleneck effect with some few more stipulations here. But basically these genotypes will not be present in a new population, so they've been lost. I'm going to give you time to write down all of these mechanisms, so you might want to pause the video, And for each different mechanism, take notes. Some highlights of a genetic drift. Like mutations in gene flow, genetic drift is this non-adaptive and just randomly happens. And it can play an important role in altering the genetic composition of smaller populations. The bottleneck effect is just this reduction in genetic diversity. Low genetic diversity in a population can increase disease and cause this low fertility rate. Bottleneck effect means that the species are less able to adapt to future changes, and so low diversity can lead to a decline in species, and also it leads to extinction.